Thank you for choosing McDonald's. What can I get for you?
Hi, can I just get like a...
Oh, are we doing this right now? Oh, um, Initial D is, real good.
Back in the day, when a 10-year-old Honda Civic didn't cost you your firstborn son and a second mortgage, ask me how I know that, there used to be this little thing called tuner culture. You see, even back during the time of the dinosaurs, owning a high-end sports car would still require the blood sacrifice of a virgin to achieve. So, with most people not having access to Aztec ritual tools, they decided to make do with what they had by upgrading the hell out of their normal daily drivers in order to achieve power that previously only high-end sports cars could achieve. This could be seen in countries around the world and in pretty much every class of vehicle you could find, even in pickup trucks, giving rednecks everywhere the ability to turn their workhorses into track racers instead of turning their malt beverages into domestic violence.
Do not be a retard when I'm trying to help you out.
Now, while tuner culture was becoming popular all over the world, it had taken on a very specific personality in Japan. Due to a combination of mountainous geography, the popularity of circuit racing, low car prices, lax environmental regulations, the Chadley urge to endanger the lives of yourselves and others for cheap thrills, and Japan's affinity for making high-quality, nimble cars, by the 1990s, JDM tuner culture had absolutely exploded, leading to the rise of the Hashiriya, or Japanese street racers. This shit was literally everywhere, and for a while there, it really was like the movies. People would travel from hours away just to watch illegal street races. Racers would form groups and roll around like they were professional teams. I mean, it was enough of a thing that you could actually get arrested for just watching a race. The whole romance that JDM tuner culture created would serve to inspire creators all over the world, one of which being a little-known manga artist named Shuichi Shigeno. You see, Shigeno had just finished creating his first commercially successful manga named Buri Buri Densetsu, a manga based on his passion for riding motorcycles. He then decided to use his earnings from it to purchase his first car. What's interesting though is that after buying this car, Shigeno didn't actually give a shit about cars afterwards. In an interview, Shigeno would say, "Motorcycles were enough for me when it came to thrills. I don't think that now, but when I was riding motorcycles, I thought cars were stupid and gay." Okay, I might have paraphrased that last part, but I knew what he meant. But after a few unsuccessful attempts at writing a new manga, one of Shigeno's friends suggested that he make a manga about cars. To which Shigeno responded, "Why would I want to make a manga like that? That sounds like some low-ass hanging fruit, don't you think?" Apparently, it was in fact not enough of a low-ass hanging fruit because in 1995, Initial D was released. Why aren't the pictures moving? In 1998, Initial D was released. Almost immediately it became a hit. It was everything both a car guy and anime fan would want. For every real-life car or monologue about mechanics, there's a compelling story arc or over-the-top anime trope. In fact, over-the-top is probably how I describe most of this show. Initial D has so many moments that are so hammy and cliched that if its execution was even a little bit off, then it would be at best seen as a show that aged like fine milk, or at worst would have just gotten written off before it ever even got off the ground. The show does the JoJo thing where it takes itself just the right amount of seriously, where it's able to take moments and presentations that are so unbelievably stupid and loop it all the way back around to being cool as hell. Now I know what you're thinking, I'm catching the same vibes as you, but look. Away. It's very ugly. We'll get back to that. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take it from the top. For an anime being all about the... You'd think that the cars and the racing would be the best part of the show by far. But if you think that, you'd be stupid. And a loser. Probably a For as great as the racing scenes are, where Initial D's real bread and butter lies in is in its characters and chemistry. I mean, you can have all the cool cars and over-the-top Eurobeat that you want, but if the people driving aren't cool or endearing, you're basically just watching a Forza gameplay compilation. Sure, it may be visually entertaining to watch, but nobody's gonna remember that shit because it has absolutely no weight behind it.
No offense, Forza players. It's just that nobody cares.
Initial D features a cast of authentic and compelling characters that bring the world to life, and each one of them play a part in helping that good old suspension of disbelief. When you watch Initial D, a lot of times it really does feel like you're just hanging out with the boys, talking about cars and watching your bros race, which is crazy, because for most of the characters, there is a total of 0 character development over the course of the series. Most of the time, the show relies on the characters' chemistry in order to set the stage for future situations and conflicts.
In this way, Initial D flows almost like a sitcom, where, yeah, the characters may be flatter than... but the show is able to take the group and just place them into different situations solely to see how each character acts.
This approach allows the show to keep its characters mostly static while feeling natural and compelling. Even the conflicts are still able to feel natural using this approach because the show presents them in different ways to different characters in order to give each story arc its own sense of identity and memorability. Now, with that said, despite the fact that the majority of characters in Initial D are written like this, there are a few notable exceptions. Obviously, you got Takumi, who's like the main character, so it kind of makes sense that they want to give him some dynamacy.
But quite frankly, I don't find that story arc all that compelling, even if you bully me for thinking that.
He basically just goes from don't like car to like car, and that's like it for his character development. Then you got your Mako. Mako is part of a street racing duo with another girl named Sayuki. Together they tear up the Usui Mountain Pass with their Sil 80. And if you don't know what a Sil 80 is, I don't entirely blame you because it's not an actual car. In fact, the show basically describes it as a heavily modified shitbox. Here's a link to the wiki article if you care. But either way, Mako starts out as rather unsure about her future with racing. In fact, when we first meet her, she's considering giving it up and just settling down given the fact that she recently turned the ripe old age of 20. Which means, in the eyes of the Japanese public, men see her as about to hit menopause. Mako then meets Iketani, one of the main characters of the series and coincidentally, Shigeno's favorite character, fun fact. They immediately hit it off and everything goes extremely well. One might almost say, too well. Until one night while trying to learn Usui Pass, Iketani spins out and is almost ran into by none other than Kenji and Sayuki and Mako. Iketani, being obviously humiliated in front of Mako, does the reasonable thing that any man would do in this situation. Make passive-aggressive shots at her before she can even explain herself. That's true alpha male energy right there. Mako then makes the fateful decision to retire from street racing, but before she does, she asks Iketani to arrange a race with Takumi for her last race, since she wants it to be memorable. To keep a long story incredibly short, Iketani takes this as Mako using him. Mako then races and loses to Takumi. She's given a new outlook afterwards despite losing. Mako then asks Iketani out on a date, and then he subsequently stands her up due to a combination of him feeling inadequate and being caught in extended traffic. All of this paves the way for Mako to continue racing and become more comfortable and focused on developing her skills to become the best racer she can be. Pretty good stuff. But for my money, the character that does character development better than anyone else in the cast by far is Itsuki. Because fuck Takumi, fuck Mako, and fuck Iketani, there is no one who has a personality glow up like this boy right here. I mean, Itsuki starts out as that stereotypical loser side character who is way too full of himself and puts himself before any of his friends. Which is honestly such a tired trope in anime that when I first saw him, I figured he'd probably stay that way for the whole series and be an outright blight on every episode he was in. But after a run-in with a challenger from the Miyogi Night Kids, another racing group, Itsuki inadvertently accepts a race on behalf of Takumi without even consulting him first. Obviously, this goes horribly because, obviously, Takumi said no to a race, despite not knowing that Itsuki put him up to it. This puts Itsuki in a precarious situation because now he's gonna have to own up to what he did to Takumi's prospective opponent, which will more than likely mean that he has to actively degrade himself in front of everyone in order to explain why he accepted the challenge in the first place, and also possibly get him physically assaulted.
But here's the thing though, in most anime, a character like Itsuki would have probably tried to find some zany way out of the situation, and more than likely would have been at risk of doing the same shit twice.
Itsuki decided to take his first steps into the life of a Giga Chad, and actually was gonna swallow his pride and confront his mistakes head on. Now granted, he really didn't want to do it and had a hard as hell time forcing himself to even approach the guy, but he was fully prepared to face the music like a man, even at the risk of his physical health. In the end, he doesn't have to because Takumi comes through for his homie, but just like the idea that he was going to do it despite all of that was honestly way more than you could even ask of most people in real life. It's so sick. And not only that, even after this, Itsuki doesn't regress back into being an overconfident loser. He actually stays grounded and becomes Takumi's biggest supporter. Even if everyone else around him loses all faith in Takumi winning a race, Itsuki is the one consistently defending it. Dude, honestly, I could just go on and on about this boy right here. Be thankful that I don't. You know, it's actually crazy, because out of the entire cast, the two least cool characters end up being Kenji, because he's kind of an asshole and he also subscribes to the Fairly Odd Parents school of thought when it comes to women can't drive, and Takumi. Now, don't get me wrong, Takumi's still okay, but I can't help but be put off by his odd bitchy streak when he resorts to emotional manipulation in order to express displeasure. But no matter how much he can manipulate his potential girlfriends, do you know what he can't manipulate?
Hey! Hey! You post that, I'll post your IP address for everyone here to see. Wait, what are you doing? Hey! Hey!
No, what Takumi can't manipulate is the car culture! Now, I know we just spent a whole section talking about how car culture influenced Initial D, but just beyond the blatant influence, Initial D is completely inseparable from the real-life phenomenon that inspired it. Everybody in the cast, whether they be main characters or side characters, is always so excited to talk about technical car details every time a car even so much as comes up in conversation. Having every character so invested into real-world car culture and mechanics helps make the world feel just that much more relatable and aids with the suspension of disbelief. And let's face it, Initial D can use any help it can get for suspension of disbelief.
I mean, when your anime consists of your main character losing exactly 0 races in what amounts to a Toyota Corolla, one would imagine that keeping your sense of disbelief in check would be, you know, like a little bit difficult.
But having each character take an active interest in the real-world cars and having genuine conversations about upgrades, repairs, and the prospects of buying new cars or seeing how real-world cars stack up against each other helps a ton with breaking down that barrier. It also helps the show bring a sense of unique identity, which is paramount to Initial D's staying power as a franchise. I mean, if you're eternally online ingrate like myself, who is anywhere on the internet over the last 5 years, chances are you've seen something like this. Initial D as an intellectual property has transcended the constraints of just another run-of-the-mill anime, and has entered the public consciousness in the form of memes. Even if not everybody understands exactly where it came from. Even if you have never seen a second of Initial D's anime, chances are you know what the 8-6 looks like, or associate Eurobeat with drifting cars and racing. All of this is due to the anime's impeccable, unique style. Now, this goes without saying, but there are a lot of anime out there. I mean, I wouldn't be able to run this channel if there weren't. But while there are 1.5 million things that can make an anime good or bad, there's one thing that every anime struggles with, and that's memorability. In today's landscape of dopamine drip feed media across the internet and otherwise, for an anime to stay relevant past its proverbial release schedule, it has to do something in order to capture the attention of weebs long enough to stay in their minds. And when the collective populace's attention span is currently that of a goldfish and currently getting worse by the day, that is really hard to do now, especially for a show from almost 30 years ago.
Before we continue, I'd like to take a brief moment of silence to honor the loss of my youth. Thank you.
But although it may be hard, one of the best ways to do this is to establish an instantly recognizable style and personality. And man, does Initial D have one hell of a personality. Nearly everything in Initial D's presentation is completely unique to that anime, and cannot be found anywhere else save for maybe its sequel series. By taking the, at the time, extremely obscure genre of Eurobeat and combining it with the unique art style of the manga as well as some of the most egregious CG ever seen for the races, a race scene from Initial D is instantly recognizable.
Now, I know I just got through saying that the art style and the CG of this anime are part of its unique style, and they absolutely are. However, I do feel as though that we should address the elephant in the room, that the visuals of this anime becoming part of the show's style was more than definitely an accident.
I mean, when it comes to the CG, the show came out in 1998, and there are definitely way better examples of CG being used in that era. Like the pod racers from Star Wars Episode 1, which came out the following year, still hold up pretty well. And 2 years prior, Pixar released Toy Story, so there was definitely already a precedent. However, comparing a made-for-TV anime to established Western filmmakers with massive budgets is a little bit more than unfair. I mean, during this era, most made-for-TV CG looked like butt-ugly Martians or Jimmy Neutron, which actually came out a few years later. So given the budget constraints and the novelty of 3D animation at the time, I imagine the studio just really didn't have the ability to do much better. And man, does it show. Because especially in the first season, some of these race scenes make Medal of Honor Underground look like a cinematic masterpiece. The environments and placement of flat 2D characters in the background combined with the uber pixelated renderings of actual cars can really take you out of it.
Especially if you're not like me and don't appreciate things that remind you of a time before you've worked retail for the last 10 years.
This is why most anime at that time opted to just do things the old-fashioned way and hand-draw pretty much everything. I mean, like, imagine if Evangelion was made with CG mechs. That'd probably look like shit, right? Oh. But in Initial D's case, I'm not entirely sure that going the hand-drawn 2D route would have been the best way to go either. And that's because, well, in the early seasons, the 2D animation wasn't much better. Man, apologies to anyone who worked on this, but this looks like fuck. I understand what the art direction was going for given the manga had a very similar art style, but that doesn't exactly make this okay. Later seasons would gradually begin correcting and updating the art style into something a bit more palatable, especially for modern audiences. But despite all these visual setbacks, the anime was able to use its shortcomings in the visual department as an opportunity to establish an instantly recognizable personality to great success. That's why the later seasons updated the art style rather than change it. Even the CG, which was one of the show's greatest visual hurdles, became so much a part of Initial D as a franchise that the anime decided to go all in on the CG racing for all subsequent releases, and even in some cases combine the manga's famous vehicle speedlines into the CG models. And that level of ingenuity when it comes to creating your own style is something that will never stop being impressive. Ooh, okay. Now that I've just wasted what amounts to the last year of your life gushing about this anime, you'll be justified in believing that I'm an absolute Initial D simp and think the show is absolutely incredible with barely any sins to speak of and would slob on its meat if I could.
But if you think that, then... Here. You did very poorly this semester. I'm gonna need to have your parents sign that and give it back to me by tomorrow, okay?
To be fair, I absolutely would think that way if the anime ended at third stage, but unfortunately for me and your time, it didn't. So after third stage and Takumi graduates high school, Initial D continues his story showcasing his exploits with Ryosuke and Keisuke Takahashi under Ryosuke's semi-professional racing experiment, Project D.
The goal of which is to become the most legendary race team in the Kanto region, and to help Ryosuke develop the perfect racers based on his philosophies and analysis of each race. Which sounds amazing!
I mean, a renewed focus on Takumi and Keisuke developing their racing skills and showing their progression to eventually becoming professional racers fits right in line with the narrative of Takumi going from someone who didn't care at all about cars, let alone racing them, to becoming an outright professional racer.
The problem lies in everything else.
Over the course of third stage, the anime goes through a gradual tonal shift, moving away from the perfect stupid to serious ratio to focusing more on the serious aspects of the show. This is illustrated by the focus on each character's life path after high school. You know, like getting jobs, moving on from relationships, deciding what the fuck you want to do with your life now that you're expected to pay taxes. Even after all these aspects are addressed and solved, the anime continues with this tonal change going into fourth stage and beyond. Now this wouldn't innately be a bad thing. Hell, there are plenty of examples of anime having a darker, more serious tonal shift after serializing for a while. Shows like Date Alive, Devil's a Part-Timer, and man, you guys are gonna hate me for this, Fate Collide, all go through a tonal shift after a few seasons of airing, going from a more lighthearted and comedic approach to focusing more on the story and taking serious steps towards progressing the narrative. This ends up working well because of each respective anime's execution of this tonal shift. This can come in the form of continuing the comic relief, but simply shifting the balance of comedy in the story like in Devil's a Part-Timer. Or by adjusting the way the anime is written in order to account for the newfound darker atmosphere like in Fate Collide. Initial D, however, decides to take the geriatric route by doing absolutely nothing to account for this change. You still get the over-the-top race sequences, JoJo faces, blaring Eurobeat, and predictable inner monologue, but now the show expects you to take these elements 100% seriously. And by doing so, you're left with a sense of, are we seriously doing this? Rather than just being able to enjoy the ride for what it is like you could previously because of this tonal shift. Now we're getting warmed up. Alright, let me ask you a question. Narratively speaking, what is a race in Initial D? Go ahead, pause the video. Type your answer in the comments, actually. I'd like to see what you guys come up with.
Alright, you asked for it.
No, a race in Initial D is narratively the same thing as a fight scene. I mean, the characters quite literally refer to each race as a battle. Now, follow-up question, what needs to be present in order for a fight scene to take place?
Hey.
God damn it, the answer is conflict, okay?
As I said before, Initial D relies on a cast of characters that rarely change at all and are almost completely static.
This allowed for the show to use the cast's chemistry to do the heavy lifting in establishing compelling and worthwhile conflicts. This could be seen all over the first 2 seasons of Initial D, from the race against Keisuke to the race against Wataru Akiyama. Each one had real consequences for the cast, given that at least one character would have a significant stake in whether or not Takumi wins. And this is why you could get over the fact that Takumi wins every single race, no matter what, because if he didn't, a member of the cast that you got attached to would directly or indirectly be affected by the outcome of the race. So what happens when you make almost every single character, save for Keisuke and Takumi, irrelevant when your formula relies so heavily on other characters being involved?
A piece of shit anime!
The entire latter half of the anime feels so sterile and boring compared to the first half due to the fact that the show's formula largely stayed the same without being able to capitalize on all the strengths of its cast. You can tell that an attempt was made to try and remedy this by giving opponents some screen time before the race without them, basically being biomechanically fused to their car.
But dude, is it really fucking hard to make me give a shit about an opponent's motivations or stakes when they have a collective 10 minutes outside of a car?
So what you're left with is a fight scene that has little to no context and is only slightly more visually impressive than its earlier counterparts. This is why when you see people remember races from Initial D, they're almost always remembering ones from the first or second season because those ones were significantly more compelling and memorable. What's even more frustrating is that the anime shows us that it can be still compelling without the old main cast. Let me explain. During a regularly scheduled Project D race, Keisuke goes up against an opponent that will change the course of his life for the next few episodes or so. Kyoko Iwase is a street racer who just can't seem to find interest in any man out there. Her obsession with racing and more importantly her handling of her trusty Mazda RX-7 FD essentially make her wildly disinterested with dating anyone. That is, until she meets Keisuke, who of course races his trusty FD. Kyoko is instantly smitten with Keisuke almost to the point of obsession. Like, seriously, this girl takes to him way too quickly. Like, I'd be creeped out if a girl came onto me that hard.
Which I have, so much experience with.
But despite all her faults and multiple rejections from Keisuke, she ends up pulling through for him and is instrumental in his winning record. You see, while practicing for a race against a particularly heated opponent, Keisuke's run is sabotaged by an oil slick, causing him to spin out and damage his car. With absolutely no time for repairs before the race, Kyoko decided to lend Keisuke her precious FD for the run, despite that car being her only reason for living at this point. Keisuke is then able to win the race despite the handicap of being in another car with a completely different tune and setup.
This arc encapsulates everything Initial D does well as far as character conflicts and writing goes by giving another character that the audience cares about a direct stake in the race. Too bad the show goes immediately back to its shallow-ass writing style by banishing Kyoko to the narrative shadow realm.
Pretty much the entire main story now just circulates around nothing but the racing. Even when the anime tries to bring in character backstory and tragic events into a race in order to manufacture a compelling conflict, it ends up falling flat on its face. Like in the case of Ryosuke Takahashi's last race. I know I already warned you about this, but spoilers for 5th stage in case you haven't seen it. Ryosuke finds himself in a very personal race against a former romantic rival named Rin Hojo. Rin was engaged to a girl named Kaori, in an arranged marriage that Kaori wasn't the most keen on being in. Kaori then began having an affair with Ryosuke, which eventually was discovered by both Bean and Kaori's father. The following anger and pressure to conform to the arranged marriage eventually just became too much for Kaori to bear.
This all comes to a head when Kaori decides to escape the Matrix and fight agents with Chester Bennington and Kurt Cobain in the never-ending fight to save humanity. That is to say, she offed herself, which is extremely sad, but also very based.
Green then, rather relatably, loses all the will to live and spends his days racing incredibly dangerously, hoping to die on the racetrack. And Ryosuke is just kinda Ryosuke, you know how he is. This eventually culminates in Ryosuke accepting a race against Rin Hojo to finally settle the score and hopefully help himself and Rin finally put the death of Kaori behind them once and for all.
Which sounds incredible, honestly. The premise for this race is so solid and extremely compelling, so you'd expect it to be one of the best races in the series. This is until you realize that this entire plot point is only mentioned at the tail end of the series for about 2¼ episodes and is only briefly mentioned one time afterwards.
Yet again, making what could have been the most impactful and compelling story arc in the series little more than an excuse to have a race with visuals that we've seen 1,010 times at this point. And further playing into the series' direction of giving the races all the focus while everything else is stored away in a dark corner like some kind of disgusting used Ona hole. And no matter how much my anime list tries gaslighting me into thinking that this was a good direction for the show to go in, the numbers of people completing each subsequent season after third stage speaks for itself. Now, I know that I briefly touched on this already, but Ryosuke's tragic backstory wasn't the only thing that the anime flubbed. Initial D is full of plot lines that go absolutely nowhere or are just blatantly unfinished. Like, for starters, every single character relationship, like every single one, ends up going absolutely nowhere.
Like, if I didn't know any better, I'd say the writers of this manga were like allergic to relationships or something, because every single relationship ends in the most out of left field and contrived ways possible.
Like Itsuki. I know I just gushed about him earlier in the video, but like, try this one on for size.
While Itsuki is my boy and probably the most well-written character in the show, in my opinion, he also is subjected to the most egregious end to a character relationship ever.
But keeping things short, Itsuki's relationship with this girl right here, Kazumi, is probably my favorite part of the series. Like, I swear to God, these two are literally made for each other. Itsuki is so much himself around Kazumi, and she accepts him for that, even when he lets his sleaziness leak back out every so often. And likewise, Itsuki would truly do anything for Kazumi, including letting her go when she needed to. That's why I was shattered and ready to commit war crimes when, after Itsuki and Kazumi's long-awaited reunion and rekindling of their relationship, a wild plot device appeared in the span of one episode to completely ruin their relationship in the span of like 30 seconds.
That's it. I'm killing myself.
Dude, I was so hurt after seeing this the first time. I had to go stand out on a beach for a few days looking longingly over the sea to get over that one.
Hey, what are you doing in my backyard? Get out of here.
What hurts the most about this is that it was completely unnecessary. Itsuki barely had any relevance after this arc, so it would have affected almost nothing narratively if Kazumi stayed with him. And Kazumi's betrayal was rushed so much that her decision to go back with her ex only felt obvious when Itsuki literally pitched it to her by saying, "Go with whoever you're actually in love with," while closing his eyes and looking all dickheadishly confident. Even a second before that, Kazumi leaving my boy on the side of the road like some dirty used toilet paper seemed absolutely inconceivable.
And the problem is, this isn't even the only time this happens. It's just the worst example.
Nearly every character fucks something up or is screwed out of a relationship for one reason or another. Takumi Natsumi, Itsuki Saori, Keisuke Kyoko, Ryosuke Kaori, Itsuki Kazumi, hell, even one of the best character relationships in the show was ended for almost no narrative value whatsoever. Iketani and Mako is probably the most well-established character relationship in the entire series. It's the source of the second most infuriating and stressful scene the anime has to offer, with Iketani essentially ghosting Mako due to his own insecurities. However, the anime essentially keeps this relationship at the forefront of your mind by constantly reminding you about it for the remainder of the series, heavily implying that this was not the end of Mako's Mako and Ikutani's relationship. And they were right, because Mako returns for the second extra stage OVA. And what does the anime immediately decide to do? Abruptly end the relationship, of course. Now, to be fair, this was actually handled pretty well, and Ikutani essentially decides to not pursue a relationship with Mako, even though he really wants to. This is in order to not get in the way of Mako's current career prospects of moving away to become a professional racer, which is honestly extremely noble, as well as a pretty good narrative reason to end a relationship. So then why are you bitching about it, I hear you furiously typing on your keyboard?
Well, my dear extremely rude viewer, the problem with this is that by this time in the anime, I had become so accustomed to relationships going absolutely nowhere that it had become cliched. Even before I pressed play on my completely legal means of viewing this OVA, I already knew where it was going.
Something about seeing your favorite characters be crushed over and over and over again by the weight of rejection and love lost cheapens the experience and the impact of the OVA to the point where the predictability of the whole thing was so prevalent that I was bracing at the edge of my seat to see how they fuck it up this time, rather than wondering about whether or not they may be actually able to make it work. Also, almost every time a relationship is ended, the female character gets banished to the narrative shadow realm, never to be seen again, further solidifying the painfully obvious fact that most of these female supporting characters are completely disposable because they're just thrown away once their usefulness is gone. And speaking of not completing things, by the time Initial D ends, there are still so many plot points that are just never wrapped up.
Now, I'm not going to go into extreme detail here because this video has inevitably turned all of my older viewers into dust by now, but suffice it to say the lack of narrative polish Initial D exhibits can genuinely be infuriating sometimes.
Things that are set up in earlier seasons get forgotten about and are never concluded, extremely important plot points are never explained, and generally the show ends off with an unsatisfying taste in my mouth given how much was left behind. For example, Keisuke and Takami's rematch, which we are constantly reminded about over the course of the anime, never happens. Takami's dad, Bunta's racing record and skill are never truly shown or explained. Takami stating that he doesn't have a mom is mentioned and then just never talked about again. And Natsumi's sugar daddy arc is never properly explained. So if you're wondering how and why the majority of Takami's problems unfold, like why does Natsumi have a sugar daddy? Or who actually knew about it and left the notes in Takami's locker informing him of exactly where they were? Then I'm sorry to have to be the one to hit you with the cold water, but you're gonna be left hanging.
You know, I could go on and on about everything that this show does wrong, from the idiotic changes in character design from season to season, to the loss of car culture's relevance, to the complete loss of the ability to execute the battle shonen format that the early seasons mastered. But the thing is, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse into the ground because that would just make it seem as though I despise what this anime became and am just using this video as a way to shit on everything that came after third stage. And while that is unequivocally part of how I feel, I don't hate this anime at all, like, quite the contrary.
I unironically love Initial D. It's a great anime and franchise, and even though the later seasons and sequel series failed to live up to what Initial D brought to the table in the late 90s and early 2000s, it can still be incredibly fun to watch. I mean, there's like a whole subsect of not just weebs, but like normal car guys who I'm sure are currently writing counter essays in the comments as we speak, refuting all of my criticism so far. Just know that when I'm harsh on this anime, it's not coming from a place of Monster Energy fueled gamer rage chimping out about every minute plot hole because my OTP didn't get together. It comes from Adderall fueled gamer rage chimping out over things the show could have done to be better to reach the heights of anime classics like Code Geass.
Overall, Initial D is an incredibly important anime to otaku culture, and has left its mark on the anime space and wider public alike. I just wish that Initial D could have landed everything that it tried to do a lot more elegantly, because if it could have, it would have just been that much better. Wait a second, this is my car. Get the fuck out!